Good evening. Welcome to New Tracks. My name is Jim Kello, and I'm your host for this evening. New Tracks is where mentors help modelers build. Our goal is to encourage model building and help modelers like you develop the modeling skills, techniques, and most importantly, the confidence every one of us needs to build the models we really want. We want you to experience the thrill of saying, I built that. On each New Track show, the best model railroaders demonstrate innovative new products, modeling techniques, new technology, and answer your modeling questions. New Tracks is a great opportunity to have talented modelers become your mentors. If you're new to the show, welcome. If you've been with us before, welcome back. We hope all of you come back often and tell your friends to join us. We currently have over 1,000 subscribers on either our website or our YouTube channel. We hope that you'll become a subscriber. And on YouTube, all you have to do is go to our channel, New Tracks Modeling, and click on the subscribe button, ring the bell, and check all. You'll receive all the notices for the future shows and the login links. We currently have over 300 YouTube videos that you're also able to see a lot of the past shows. On Zoom, you can watch, ask questions, speak to other modelers, show your modeling live, and participate in the lively after show. To join on Zoom, all you have to do is go to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, check subscribe. You'll get an email from the website. You'll confirm the email, then you're officially subscribed and you'll get all of the future notices. Please feel free to share the login links that you receive either on Zoom or YouTube with your friends and encourage them to join us and participate in our shows. Finally, if you want to be a guest presenter and show your models and techniques, we have several ways that you can do that. Send me an email to jimkello@newtracksmodeling.com and let's discuss. I really prefer the telephone for something like this. And if you'll send me your telephone number in that email, I'll give you a call back. Or if you'd like to donate a little bit of your time and volunteer to help us with our events, or our YouTube video productions, or the website, or just to give us ideas for future shows, please send me an email about this to the same address. Well, thanks so much for being here tonight. Now let's get on with tonight's show. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming this evening. We really do appreciate it. Hope you come back often and tell your friends about us. I want to talk just a minute about the Walters Scholarship Program for 2022. They just announced it recently. And again, they're offering two $2,500 scholarships to high school graduates who are going to proceed in college or junior college in one of the STEM programs. And I really think this is a real excellent opportunity for any of your children or grandchildren that are model railroaders and graduating to have a real opportunity to take Walters up on this very great offer, in my opinion. I wish that other manufacturers in the hobby field and hobby shops and different organizations would offer the scholarships like Walters is doing. In fact, one club that I found out about yesterday is doing almost exactly what Walters is doing. And that's the Rockville Model Railroad Society. And one of our long-term viewers, Greg Cassidy, who's a member of that club, is here this evening with another member of the club, Jim Anderson, to talk a little bit about what the club decided to do for a scholarship for graduating seniors who are model railroaders. Greg, Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to give a very brief history of the club and then let Jim talk about the scholarship program. Rockville Model Railroad Society was founded in the early 60s and it's been under a couple different names. We first started in Rockville, Maryland, and we're still centered in the Maryland area near DC. As we went through a variety of names, we picked up a 501c3 program, and we had quite a large layout that about 20 years ago we had to abandon when the church we were in got sold. So we're currently just doing round robins, always looking for a new site. One of the big things that we do in this area, being a 501c3, we can take donations and consignments and sell them at the 3 times a year Timonium show to help out railroad widows or children of railroaders who don't know what to do with their stuff. But one of the things I'm most proud about is something that one of the members of our board of directors has come up with, and I'll let Jim Anderson talk about that.
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about the program that we're offering. A couple of words, one is we are a small group of very passionate model railroaders, and we all very much want to pass on kind of our passion to the hobby for the next generation of folks coming up, but also to the general public. We've been around for a long time, and for the longest time, we did struggle in regards to how best to reach out to the community. But as fate would have it, like many of you, I received the Walthers catalog or the Walthers flyer every couple of months, and I happened to be flipping through it, and I did see the Walthers scholarship opportunity that was being offered. And when I saw that, it kind of triggered some thoughts about how we could potentially contribute. But one of the things is my daughter was a senior at our local high school here in Montgomery County. And as we were applying for colleges, her student counselor had advised her that there were scholarship opportunities available to people in the community from local organizations similar to ours. And I was putting 2 and 2 together, and I was thinking, well, gee, we've been an organization for a long time. We have a very strong balance sheet, and why not put that money to good use by offering these opportunities? So, we met as a club, and we came to kind of a consensus that this would be a good thing for us to do. The first step was really to kind of contact Montgomery County school administration, and we had targeted the community that we're chartered in, and we reached out directly to them. They gave us kind of general high-level instructions in terms of what was required, and it was very simple. It was essentially you had to develop a flyer, which we did develop, and an application and a process by which to accept the application. So once the application was developed, and again that was based on the Walthers announcement, that was given to the school administration, who then in turn distributed to all of the high schools in the Montgomery County, Maryland jurisdiction, and the guidance counselors give it to the teachers in the STEAM area, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So it's a wide spectrum. And those teachers in turn will give them to students who they think would be deserving of the opportunity. So they get the flyer. They can go onto our website, download the application, fill it out, and then in April we will make a selection. But it was a fairly easy process to go through. I do have to pass on so much credit to another one of our members, Ben Sullivan, who actually who updated our website, which was a significant task, and also updated, the application form for folks to download and submit. So it was a real team effort on that part, but we really see this as a strong vehicle to kind of bring in the next generation of the hobby. And one of the things that we've all observed, and I think, across our community is exactly that. I mean, model railroading is a strong community of really good people. And I think the next generation of youth is always looking for that community. And the fact that we're able to provide this opportunity, I think, kind of presents a window into that. And it just makes me and all of our club members very hopeful about advancing the hobby in this small way. And we're all extremely excited about it. And we plan to do this on an annual basis. And we think we're really going to make a difference in someone who is truly interested in the hobby, and word gets out about that. And I think it'll go a long ways. So we're real excited about it, and just we're so happy that we all kind of came together and made this opportunity available. And we're happy to speak with any other associations or groups that are interested in doing this. I think our application could potentially be a template, and we would certainly work with any group in updating their web presence to make something similar available. So we're excited about it, and we're excited to have the opportunity to share that with everyone on this evening's program. And Greg, I don't know if you have any closing words.
No, I think I just want to mention that one of the impetuses for this was one of our longtime members, Bill Robertson, passed away a couple of years ago, and he bequeathed $500 to the club and said, use it in a way to advance model railroading. And that really got our brains churning in what can we do with this? We had a few thoughts about it, but then when Jim was proposing the scholarship, we said yes. We have quite a large budget and nothing to spend it on, so we said let's up it some. So that's where the $2,000 scholarship came from.
And I would also just mention that our club is very active in local train shows, and as Greg had mentioned, we work with folks who have estates that they're trying to liquidate, and we will bring their train collections up and trying to sell them on for the benefit of the folks. And we have a lot of youth who kind of come up and make outreach to our group, and we just again felt that this was kind of a continuation of that. I mean, we get no better feeling in the world than when we're setting someone up with a train set or higher graded quality, whether it be freight cars or engines. I mean, we actually give a lot of stuff away when you get right down to it, and we really feel very positive about that. So that was great. So thank you.
Well, Greg, Jim, thank you so much for being here this evening. I really do appreciate it. And if anyone is interested in possibly doing something like this for your club or organization or NMRA division, you have, Greg is normally here at each one of our meetings, and hopefully Jim will be back. And feel free, please get in touch with them and have them try to help you establish something like this. I think this, when I first heard that Walters was doing it, I think this is one of the greatest things I've ever heard about to attract young people to model railroading. And, I can't say enough good things about Walters for starting this off, at least in my mind. And Jim and Greg, thank you so much for being here tonight and telling us what your club is doing in this regard. If anybody else is doing something like this, if you'll let me know, I'd love for you to come on the show and talk about what you're doing and how you're working with your local school district or what your plans are that you might want to be interested in starting something like this. Because I think this is a great way to get young people involved in our hobby, and you never know where that'll lead in the future.
Thank you,
Now,
Jim, for the opportunity.
yes, sir, anytime. Now I'd like to turn to something a little different for our shows. We have a member that has been on several of our shows in the past, Father Ron Walters. And I called him up and talked to him and suggested that what I'd like to try to do at each one of our shows is open it with a short prayer, which I consider just another form of mentoring. So, Father Waters, if you don't mind doing it, I sure would appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. I'm sorry I'm a little late this evening. As I mentioned to you in our conversation, I'm kind of the head of a group of Franciscans here in the Southwest, and I got wrapped up into something, got in a little late this evening. Oh God, as we express our creativity in creating in miniature the world around us, may we marvel at the beauty and genius which created the world and instilled in us a portion of your great knowledge and wisdom. Amen.
Father Ron, thank you so very much. I can't thank you enough for doing this. I hope everybody agrees that this should be a part of our show. And I plan to do it, each one of them, both on this show and Saturday, as often as Father Ron is available to be with us. Thank you again, Father.
You're welcome.
So now I'd like to turn and talk a minute about the Saturday shows that Chris Blackmar is the moderator of. And this is about scratch building. Chris, would you like to talk about it a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everybody. And just a brief note on this past Saturday show, we took a look at soft pastels and using soft pastels to color wall siding. It's in things of that nature. And we took a look at the difference of chalks versus pastels versus weathering powders versus pigments. And then we took a look at two different techniques on using alcohol solvent-based liquids to apply the pastels. And finally, we took an in-depth review of the 3 different grades of hardnesses of pastels. So if you're not familiar with all of that type of stuff and very basics of pastels with their formats being in pan pastels, soft pastel sticks, pencils, or the pigments, if you want to throw pigments in a soft pastel category, then take a look at the YouTube video that we had last week on Saturday. This next Saturday, we'll be taking a look at some bracing and some trim work on the walls, because I'm using sheet siding for my structure. We are building an ice house, and we have it being built in O scale, HO scale, and I believe now there is an N scaler out there doing it. And we have it in styrene and in wood and paper. We also have Father Ron, who is building it literally with matchsticks and cardboard. So we go all the way back to the very rudimentaries on model building on this one. And I am opening it up to everybody to come and join us 1 o'clock Eastern time on Saturday. And the reason I brought up the pastels is that we are currently working in association with a coupon code that Dakota Arts, who is a very large specialty shop on soft pastels, they are offering a 10% discount on their products to people who use the coupon code, and that is Railroad 10. And that coupon code is good for pretty much everything they've got. The nice thing about Dakota Arts is they do have the pastels that you cannot yet, pastel manufacturers that you may not be able to get from some of the large other vendors like Dick Blick, Amazon even, and on places like Jerry's Artorama and things. So come and join us Saturdays, 1 o'clock Eastern time, and we go for about an hour, hour and a half. Jim, I'll throw it back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chris. You're doing a great job. You had an awful lot of people there Saturday, and I'm sure you'll have a lot more there today or this coming weekend. So thank you so much for doing it. The build alongs coming up. We've got one tonight that Martin Brechbiel MMR is doing. On March the 23rd, we start another one with Bruce Nicholson, who owns Seaport Model Works. He's going to be building one of his waterline kits of a 53-foot coastal steam passenger vessel. Then on March the 30th, Rick and Marie Hunter are back doing one of their Hunterline 50-foot clean post railroad bridges. April the 6th, Dave Vaughn, who owns Wit and Wisdom Models, is going to be teaming up with Jim Murphy, who will build the Nighthawks Cafe. This is a model of the John Armstrong diner that's famous for model railroaders. And I'm sure you're going to be interested in that one. I really think it's great that Wit and Wisdom is bringing back that model. Starting May the 25th, Chris Corse, owner of Conowingo Models, starts his build along of the Kello Trolley Station. June the 1st, Bill Banner, owner of Banner Model Works, is going to start a build along of his ON30 caboose kit. This is our first ON30 model that we've built, and I'm sure it won't be the last. Then we've got Paul Egret, who is going to design, and John Thomas Reynolds, who's going to build a card model starting July the 23rd. And we've got more to come after that. So I hope that you'll go to our website and find out all of the information on each one of these and how much the discounts are and how to order them and what the code for each one of them is. Our next My Build that is sponsored by Dan Darty and his wife Amy's company, Model Railroad Resource, LLC, is going to be February the 16th and March the 16th. And Chris Corse, of course, is the person that is in charge of these. But Phil, if you could run the video for our sponsor on these, Model Railroad Resource.
Welcome to the world of scale, O&S railroading. We are your resource for all O&S scale modeling. Both our magazines are advertiser supported and free to read online, download as a PDF, or even print. All advertisers are hot linked to their website, so if you see something you like, just click. Please check out our websites for the current issues. All back issues available free for the O-Scale Resource and the S-Scale Resource magazines. And, if you are a manufacturer, distributor, or retail establishment, please contact us through our website for advertising opportunities.
I really do appreciate Dan and Amy being the sponsor for this show, or this segment of our shows. And Chris, would you like to talk about them a little bit?
Sure, Jim. I'll put up my slide here in a second. And as always, we're doing our My Build. This time it'll be on March 16th. And of course, that's featuring you. So send us your photos of your builds. They don't have to be done. May even be something you need help with. So please drop me an email, railrunner130@hotmail.com with those pictures. And if you haven't included it.
You're cut out, Chris.
I think he might have lost his connection.
Yeah, I think we did. But I hope that everyone will consider sharing your modeling photos with us. And again, if you'll just send them to Chris with a description and your name, then he also asked if you'll include a picture of yourself so that we can identify the person and get to know what you look like when we're looking at your modeling. Chris, I'm sorry that we lost your discussion about this, but I do appreciate so much you taking the lead in this segment of our show. Now I'd like to turn to Paul Thompson for the quick tip for this evening. Paul?
Great, thank you, Jim. And I'm afraid this one is going to be quick. If we can bring up the share. This was an item passed on to me by Al Collins, and I thought it worked very well. I hope everybody can see this. What I've got here is, there we go. This is the beginning of it. I went to Michael's and picked up from the artist section, a palette paper pad, which is basically disposable palettes. And it's almost like an acrylic paper. And you can cut it up to whatever size you need. And it's good for glue, paint. You've got 40 sheets for next to nothing. I think it was $6 that I paid for this. And it's a really quick way of just mixing up small batches of things if you're not into a whole palette or you just got a little wee job. And the cleanup is really quick because you just pitch it away and go on to the next one. And I thought it was a really great idea. And thanks very much for Al to point that out. Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. And Al, thank you so much for sharing that information with us. Well, now I'd like to turn to our build along for this evening. This is one of Paul Reeves' Kershaw models that Martin Brechbiel, MMR, is building. So Martin, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Oh, you caught me by surprise. Let's see. This looks possible. That looks right. We're all good there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you never know.
Throw it in slideshow at the bottom right, make it full screen.
This is a picture. This isn't even the slides.
Oh, okay.
It's full screen on my computer. I mean, it's not PowerPoint. It's the same thing I used last week, in fact. In fact, it's the same set of files, just the next half of it. Okay, where we stopped last week, we just put a roof on the structure. And, well, we put the cardboard on it, but we'll put the rest of the roof on and a lot more. And in fact, we'll get to the end of the show, well, at the end of the structure on this one, tonight, unless something bizarre happens on the internet. Okay, well, outside of this, we got a cardstock roof. It's all nice and secure. We need to put the rafter tails, for lack of a better word, on it, and a chimney on it, because it's kind of naked right now. So let's move forward. This is what I'm calling the rafter tails, because it doesn't have real rafters. You just got to stick little pieces of wood. The instructions give you a color code for which strip wood to use for this. You just cut it at a bevel and stick it up in there and snip off the excess. Okay, the only problem here is placement. Instructions actually say on 2-foot centers, except that's a bit of a problem because 2 feet out from the end, where the end rafter would be, is right about a third of the way in top of this window. And the way the roof comes down and the way the window frame fits up into the roof, there's no room between the top of the window and the roof. So you have to sort of fudge it, for lack of a better term. So I placed them right on each side of the window, figuring that's where there would be a support beam anyhow for the wrap around the windows. And we just fill in the rest as best as possible. You know, you just have to make do with that and guesstimate on it as best you can. And come back and paint those later. Okay. Kit comes with a smokestack and a smoke jack, a metal chimney. And well, I didn't want to use the metal chimney. Bricks are nice. We'll have a little bit of brick texture in the thing. The way to put a brick chimney on here, you can just cut out the hole and drop it in there and pray it doesn't fall all the way through, or try to catch it with some glue on the way by. What I like to do is take a scalpel and cut 3 surfaces free, and then just fold the cardboard down flat so it's at 90 degrees parallel to the ground. And now you have a platform that'll hold up your chimney. And then you can use the surrounding part to get it square and straight on the roof. So this is now your support base. And you just cut this out and fold it over. You'll get it, it'll fold over eventually. You might take a little bit of pressure and pushing a few times. You don't want to push it too far, because if you push it too far, it's going to be hard to get back out. Okay, so we dropped this as a casting for a chimney, or it was a 3D printing, I don't know which. It's got a couple of coats of different types of red on it. I haven't finished it yet at this point. But it drops in here, a little bit of goo, a little bit of CA, holds it in place. Some 5 thousandths copper flashing. I have some copper foil that I picked up at an estate auction more than 20 years ago. I'm still using the same roll of copper off that roll, so you can imagine how big it is. But it's beginning to deplete, so I'm not quite sure what to replace 5 thousandths copper with. I see people selling copper foil. I just don't know how thick it is. And we have the starter row for our shingles. So we're going to put that down, because if you don't put the starter row down, you get all these notches on your 3-tab shingles, and you can see the gray cardboard underneath it. So you always put this down in real life as well as on the model. Well, you put down a few 3-tab shingled roofs in your lifetime, you know how much fun that is anyhow. Okay, easy enough to do. These are peel and stick. So you peel them off, you alternate so the lines are spaced alternately. It works out very nicely. You actually end up with a little bit left over. And then you have plenty for a nice little ridge cap to go on here. So it's a little tedious. You cut apart individual shingles, fold them in half, stick them down, overlap them, work from one end to the other end, or you can work from both ends and meet in the middle. Depends what kind of roofer you are and what union you belong to. Okay, I didn't use the sign that came with it. In fact, I didn't use any of the signage that came with this kit because I didn't really care for it, and also because I'm going to rename this to something else. And I made a 3-piece little brass bracket behind this sign that holds it up, that actually latches into the space between the corner trim and the windows on each side. So it just actually kind of snaps in and fills that space over the clapboards very neatly. It came with non-functional lampshades. You're supposed to just use a piece of wire and stick it through the wall and pretend that there's a light bulb in it, which I thought was a little... I thought it was something in need of an upgrade, so I happen to have 2 of these. I'm not sure where they come from. One moment. It's on the back here of the card. And I put it, of course, clipped together the wrong way. Locomotive Joe, who I've never heard of before or since, but you can find these things on the internet and on eBay pretty easily. They're not too hard to find. And this was a little bit of an adventure because I'd already put the floor in for the ceiling and the floor for the second floor, separating it from the first floor. So there was no access to run the wires through. Well, that's what a scalpel is for. So you do some minor surgery from the inside out, cut a little hole, fish the wires through and drop it down on the inside. And if I didn't tell you I'd done that, you wouldn't have known it. So, embarrassment there, not thinking ahead. I added this little smoke jack on the bump out, thinking, okay, this is supposed to be the kitchen bump out. It needs a little bit of a stovepipe. And this is from Builders and Scale. And actually, much to my surprise, drilling a hole through this, what I thought was fairly fragile wood product, corrugated material, hand drill with a number, I don't know, what was it, a number 29, number 30 drill bit, cleanly went right through it without ripping it apart or shredding it or breaking it. I was amazed. I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have a terrible time repairing this mess. And I did it anyhow, but I figured, a terrible mess makes it more interesting anyhow, probably in the long run. So drill a hole, snap it through, a little bit of goo and CA. It's in place. It's not going anywhere. So, okay, we start with a little bit of weathering. There's a little bit of shading on the shingles, a little bit around the windows. The front step's no longer white. It looks like someone had an accident on the front step. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Nothing too extravagant here. Basically, it's dry brushing and leftover paint from when I've cleaned the brush from other projects using dark colors and greens and browns and blacks. And the back, just a little bit, just to get started on it, just to give us a little bit of texture and color differentials. Okay, so that being said, we're going to go fast forward just a wee bit, and I'm being completely facetious on the wee. Oh. And we've done a little bit more weathering, a little bit more landscaping, a little bit more scenery work. We've got some moss on the roof. It's a dubious building, at least. We have some signage on the door. We'll come back to that in a moment. A bloody footprint and some foliage. It's not the best kept up place for good reason. Okay, our signage. It's the Four Winds Bar. I don't know how many of you may or may not recognize this emblem. It's a bit obscure. Refers to the Blue Oyster Cult, which was a band that mentioned the Four Winds Bar in one of its songs. The proprietor on here, which I know you can't read because it's really small print, but the proprietor is none other than one H.P. Lovecraft, whose name you may or may not know. And we have a midnight, the Oyster Boys are meeting at midnight, so it's a bit unpleasant. The gloom that goes with Innsmouth. When we come around the back to the side here, we see a visitor to the property who's had a bit of misfortune, a lot more mold, a little bit more weathering here and there and everywhere. Dreary little place. And yes, indeed, he has met up with one of the Oyster Boys, unfortunately, who has expressed his displeasure at having an unwarranted incursion into their territory. Around back, more mold on the roof, coal box, wood box, more shrubbery, more odds and ends and gravel footpath. And we come around to this side and you see a little bit of scribble on the wall, which says Dagon has risen, which doesn't bode well for anybody, particularly the man around the other side of the house. So last but not least, I splurged and went out and got a weather vane for the top. This is from Banta. It's all laser cut little thin pieces of wood that you build up into having some depth, and it goes together with a little bit of patience, but it looks nice. It doesn't actually operate. I guess it could be made to operate if you really worked at it. And it's mounted with a little piece of brass wire down through a piece of copper that's actually fitting over one of the cap shingles, roof cap shingles, ridge cap shingles. And I think that's about where we'll leave you with this build. So you can do fun things with this. And that's the end. I was right. And there's where you find me. And if you have questions about anything, other than Mr. Lovecraft, who obviously knew things we shouldn't know, I'm ready to take questions.
Martin, did I also see on that building you had an electrical connection that didn't have
Yes.
electrical wires going?
I didn't point it out. It was there.
I thought so. Thank you.
Yeah. Anything
Martin,
else?
thanks so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it. I think it's a beautiful little model that you built. And it seemed like the kit came together very easily for you.
Oh, no, this is not a complicated or difficult build. You know, it's very simple, relatively speaking. It's basically a box with a few angles to it. It's not too complicated. And I think anybody could, you know, this is a good entry level or half a rung up from entry level kit. It's not complicated.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for taking the time to build it for us. We really do appreciate it. Well, now I'd like to turn to Chris Smith, who is going to talk to us about Why LLC. The LCC program was started by the NMRA, and there was a lot of discussion about it early on. I don't hear that much discussion about it right now. And I don't think a lot of modelers, myself included, really know if LCC is something that we should be paying a lot of attention to. And that's why I was really pleased when Chris Smith came along and said, well, I'd like to try to put some information out about it. And so, Chris, thank you so much for doing this.
You betcha. Hello, everybody. So this segment, what we're going to do is try to discuss a fairly technical subject a little differently. And what we want to do in doing this is consider, rather than how to implement a layout control network, let's talk about why layout control using a communication bus network in the first place. As a matter of fact, now I want to make it clear what I don't want to give the impression is this is about why should you have a layout control bus or network. As a matter of fact, I could have named this segment why we might not need layout control in our model railroading. So if that's your takeaway from this segment, then that's just as appropriate as to if you might learn why you might need it. So we're not going to talk about how to install, how to wire, how to buy what components per se. We're going to concentrate on why we might need it. So let's assume for this segment that we're a model railroader, individual or group, planning, building, or modifying a layout, or that we're on a planning team or club committee, and talk about planning considerations that may be appropriate for your particular situation. So the agenda, what we'll do is we'll try to define layout control network or bus, talk briefly about general bus configurations, why we might use it, which will be the lion's share of what we'll talk about. And then in a future segment, when we get time to do it, we'll do how I particularly use layout control, and then we'll summarize and perhaps discussion. Little bit about me. I've been model railroading in N-scale since '69. I built my DCC system from a kit in 1997. It is still running the layout. I also built and programmed a 9-node CMRI system that is up and operating, all for a 600 square foot layout for operating. I'm also a crossover hobbyist. I'm an avid turbine jet modeler and flyer. And I spent 28 years on active duty as a gunship pilot for Army Special Ops. And currently I'm a contract maintenance and development test pilot for Army Special Ops. So that's just a little bit about me. Now, my perspective, when talking about layout control networking or layout command control LCC, here's how I approach it. Number one, I'm not a computer hobbyist. I'm not an electronics hobbyist. I'm not a professional computer programmer. I'm a model railroader who identified a need or functions that I wanted for my own layout and learn what I needed to learn. And as you all know, layout control tends to be a relatively complex subject. So there's some application the model railroader might want to look into, but it is a difficult subject. And the reason I feel it's a difficult subject is because it's a niche subject. So let's think for a minute. Let's take the population of model railroaders out there. Let's say out of 100% model railroaders, how many of that population even has a layout, is planning to build a layout, or is considering a layout sometime in his future? Now, I've heard estimates as high as 80% of model railroaders have a layout or are working on a layout. I think that's way overly optimistic. That might be a good discussion for the after show with Clark, what everybody thinks. But in my impression from decades of reading, I'm going to say, I'm still going to remain optimistic, but I'm going to say we're more like 50% at best have or are building a model railroad layout. So as you see in this subject, the population starts to dwindle. So how many of that population of layout owners is considering operating with a group of friends and a couple of enemies in the basement? You can see the numbers start to dwindle even more. Now, this could be small layout. This could be large basement size layout. Part of the problem is what defines a layout. But let's continue. So now we have a small population of model railroads with layouts that need or are planning a layout control net. In fact, I'm going to say we're looking at, say, 10% of model railroaders have a need or an interest in layout control networking or a layout control bus. So it makes this subject relatively difficult to talk about. It's very in-depth type of subject for a general model railroading audience. And to go with that, how long has NMRA's LCC been a thing? It's been a thing for at least a decade. Layout control networking has been a thing. Well, for example, CMRI was available in 1985 to model railroaders. So as you can see, and this is simply my theory, my opinion, it's a very small population of model railroaders that might need layout control networking. So it's a hard subject to discuss. It's important to note what layout control is not. Here again, my opinion. Number one, for most of us, at least in North America, it's not about automated train running. I call that Rule 98. If you were to ask me, out of the top priorities for implementing a layout control network, automated train running would be about number 98 out of 100. It's that low on the totem pole. And that's true for most model railroad layout owners because we are model railroaders. We want to run our trains. It isn't that much fun to have a computer running trains for us. The other thing is it's not just about signals. That's a big reason to go for a layout control bus, but not the only reason. It's also not about code writing. There are plenty of solutions in model railroad layout control that don't involve the model railroader doing a lot or any code writing. And it's likely, as we stated, not something that's needed for most model railroaders. The other thing that's important to note is it is not to replace DCC. It wasn't intended, even the NMRA's layout command control is not intended to replace DCC. It predates DCC by decades, layout control network. Now, does your layout, let's say we have a big layout. Let's say we have people that come over to run trains. Does our layout have to be networked? Well, fundamental layout control, if you have hand operated, like a Pico, point operated turnout, or hand throws, like on some locations on my model railroad in the picture, there's a ground throw, a caboose ground throw. That's layout control. It just isn't, for the purpose of this discussion, layout control networking, because they're not, this throw isn't communicating with any other device on the layout per se. In addition, Fast Track's Bullfrog, for example, a kit you can buy to operate your turnouts remotely by cable. Machine operated tortoise switch machines. And in my case, I still have a few DCC accessory bus DCC machines that operate some crossovers. Those are all layout control items, but they're not networked per se. Now, in considering turnout control, when we talk about remote, just to clarify a little bit, remote control kind of has a new definition nowadays, wherein you're controlling a device outside of the layout room, for example. But in reality, remote control also means that the operator, the crewman, is not next to the turnout and throwing it by hand. So a cable or a switch machine with a toggle in the fascia is remote control, but it's evolving to include now networking outside of the layout room through internet, not to be confused. Now, where we might start needing to talk about a layout control network, a bus communication system in the layout, is when we want to talk about prototype turnout control. Prototype turnout control is more than some are motorized and some are hand throw levers and padlocks. There are also rules and protocols and features in some prototype turnouts that can be emulated realistically using a layout control bus that includes some logic. Now, power only, and these are prototype terms, power only type switches, as a railroader would call it, is one that generally only a remote towerman or dispatcher operates. They really don't have trackside provisions for the crew. Dual control, typically associated with a control point in a CTC environment, for example, would have both localized crew ability trackside, as well as typically they're run remotely by a dispatcher. Electric controlled type turnouts involve logic that says, hey, crewman, I'm not going to let you open this switch until I do some safety checks. And then, of course, there's padlock type. This is where we now consider potential for a layout control bus. So what is layout control? For the purpose of this discussion, it's a system for controlling the functions on the layout separate from whatever controls the locomotives on the layout. These functions then are connected to a communication bus network. Now, it's not necessarily defined as LCC. And the reason we say that is because LCC is now a very specific communication standard adopted, that it's not a total description. As a matter of fact, layout control networks, there are a number of solutions. LCC, of course, being one of those solutions. But each of these are different in some ways, similar in other ways, with different particular communication standards. Now, I'm going to keep rolling fairly quickly through here. There's a fair amount of things to look at in roughly 30 minutes. But just a refresher for those that may not know, LCC is the NMRA's trademark term for a layout control network. It used to be called NMRA Net. It was based on choosing from a number of proposals sent in by different organizations and individuals, and they adopted the Open LCB group standards. And that standard, what's the backbone of that standard is CAN bus, CAN bus communication. It utilizes, ideally in its base form, it uses what's called producer consumer type network concept, wherein some device produces an event, then that event is consumed by one or more devices on the communication network. So you push a button and it produces an event. A consumer device that has a turnout motor swaps the points on a switch. CAN bus, it's simply a vehicle bus standard that falls within the OBD2 troubleshooting and diagnostics form. The CAN bus is one of those. Basically, there are 5 general automotive type bus systems. If you have a modern car, it may likely have CAN bus in it. It was developed by Bosch. And so the point of this is that the LCC choice for going with CAN bus communication is a pretty good choice. It's so well documented, industry understands it, and it has features being a producer consumer type system where devices communicate each other between applications, but without a host computer. That was a pretty high priority item for the NMRA. If you look at I extracted some of the NMRA's goals for layout command control, interoperability, but one of the big things is because there is admittedly a little bit of computer phobia in the model railroading community. And for good reason, a lot of model railroaders don't have computers. So you don't want to have a system that demands a computer. But there has to be an understanding that in some applications of a computer bus network or a layout control network, you may just well need a PC depending on what sophistication or functionality you're looking for, like CTC. Other standards, CMRI has probably been the longest running layout control bus system used for model railroading. Dr. Chubb estimates somewhere around 3,000 layouts have CMRI. They are everywhere, pretty much. It uses not CAN bus, but it uses RS-232 converted either to 422 or 485 serial. And its primary characteristic is it's one of the master-slave polled configurations, wherein there's a master computer that polls slave nodes for information and then calculates based on that information. Now, I call them dumb nodes. And the benefit of a dumb node is that this circuit card, if I show you this circuit card right here, I can pull that card and replace it with a spare simply by unhooking the Molex connectors, but there's absolutely no logic or software changes required. It falls into place. The computer doesn't even care. All it needs to know is the dip switch is set to the correct node address and you're off and running. So that's a dumb node. It reacts to, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Digitrax LocalNet, some of you are familiar with that. Digitrax calls that proprietary Ethernet. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but it is also a plug-in type, but it's very proprietary. It is designed not to need additional bus wiring. So what that tells me, and I haven't done a lot of study on it, but I do know fellows that are using it and using it with success. Supposedly it doesn't need a lot of additional bus wiring. Now, where does Arduino fit into this? Think of Arduino. We're all familiar with standalone closed loop Arduino, wherein you set it up for animation. Like you've got a town with lights, you want lights blinking on and off, and you might have noises or the proverbial tornado display. Arduino is simply a hardware solution. It could be used with almost any net standard. There are shields you can get for Arduino for Wi-Fi, for Ethernet, for CAN bus. So it could be used in an LCC application. And it can also, Seth has them as CP nodes that can be integrated into a CMRI bus network. So don't think of Arduino as a net standard in and of itself. It's just a piece of hardware that a manufacturer could use for a layout control network. So let's look at a generic layout. Now this happens to be my layout in general form. You've got a west staging over here. So we got west staging over here. Essentially, it's 120 some feet of shelf layout, really. And then you've got east staging over here. Nothing special, and we're not going to focus on track plan or any of that. We'll just demonstrate, okay, here's a generic layout, and we're considering a layout control network. Now, could be that we're going to consider a layout control network for a generic shelf or smaller layout. This could be just as applicable. So there is a specific process. Most of you all have thought of this when you approach pretty much any project in model railroading or any project in any other endeavor. What are we trying to achieve? What we don't want to do is get the cart before the horse, and you can get down a rabbit hole in layout control bus type things at your peril. So what we want to do is we want to think about what are we trying to achieve? What functionally do we want? What did the real railroad do? What hardware is appropriate and what communication standard suits the goals? It could very well be when we talk about communication standard, if you're a modular club or setting up a layout in an environment that doesn't support, for example, Wi-Fi, that would probably not be a standard you would adopt. In the general producer-consumer configuration, you have a series of nodes that are interconnected by a small wire communication bus. The nodes are distributed. And like we said, and this is pretty much what CAN bus LCC will do, devices produce events, other devices then consume those events. Ideally, the setup for a lot of folks would be that notice we don't need a computer to run all of this. It's just the nodes, they're set up, and then they're running. It's not quite that simple. It's quite often that you're going to end up needing some form of human interface, an iPad or computer, in order to set up the nodes so that they can run autonomously. And in some cases with more complicated functionality, perhaps even a permanent host controller on the network. In contrast, the master-slave type of bus standard uses a master computer. Here we have our master computer. And then it's also connected much the same. Now, these nodes are shown pretty much how they are on my layout. You gang the nodes where they need to be for hot areas that have a lot more functionality. For instance, around 4, 5, and 6, and others can be more spread out. Now, there's a temptation. Well, first of all, with the master slave, again, the master computer polls for inputs, takes those inputs from the slave nodes, calculates what to do with those inputs, like push buttons, detectors, and other types of input devices, calculates what to do, and then it sends the nodes messages on what to do as a result. Turn on LEDs, operate signals, turn switch motors. That's a master slave. So all of the processing is done here at the master computer. The dumb nodes simply react, send messages when polled, and react. Again, with any control network, distribution of the nodes is pretty key. Let's say we want to try to cheat the system and go with a super node, or we want to gang a bunch of nodes centrally because it might look easier to hook up and wire. But notice if I've got to cross these layout benches with wiring to a device in the west staging, those are long, enormous wire runs. In contrast, if we distribute our nodes, the devices can be managed easier, shorter wire runs. And then with this kind of system, you can isolate node 8 and run troubleshooting diagnostics if you need to, or chase wires that are a lot shorter. So there's a benefit to this distribution plan for nodes on a layout. Now, a small layout might only need one node, or say a couple of nodes. Now we add the signal. So you can see the nodes. There are a number of devices. Now this is not representative of my layout. Node 8 has actually in their neighborhood of 16 track detectors, 20 turnout motors, and a lot more signals. Speaking of the signals, the hardware choices we make in planning are very critical. In my case, a searchlight signal, I use a single LED with a dual element. So you have a green element and a red element, but you're talking about two outputs from that node in order to operate that searchlight signal. And as most of you know, when you combine green and red, you get yellow. That's why these particular LEDs work very well. But it minimizes the amount of outputs. So it minimizes the size and number of total nodes. In contrast to that, had I gone with, in my case, 3-element color light type signals, I would need another output line. And I calculated in my case that I would have needed another 120 some output lines, which is about 3 more CMRI nodes. So that choice is something that we want to get ahead of in the planning process to determine how much output are you going to need. If you look at, say, you're a Penzi fan, and you look at a Penzi signal head, we could pair some of these and get the same thing and get 3 outputs. Now, if you need approach lighting where they're dark until a train approaches a circuit, you might need 4 in order to light up this center. So signal hardware is a very important planning consideration. Now, obviously, you don't need to talk about signals if you don't need to adapt signals. But if we're going to think about that in planning our layout or modifying our layout, these are the kind of things that we want to dig into. In my case, if you look at these signals, my signals are scratch built. This is N scale. So there's a signal bridge here with 2 signal masts that are double headed. So each of the LEDs has 3 wires. So that's 6 wires running down a 1/16 outer diameter tube. So the inner diameter is much less. You can see with 6 wires, and then they all come together, and there are 12 wires running down this 3/32 tube into the ground. So planning wire sizes, planning how many wires need to move through your signals is a consideration to make, not just the size of your nodes. Node distribution, very important. Break the layout up. In matter of fact, I did it kind of like I broke up the layout for the DCC booster zones. And we then can easy troubleshoot, document, and maintain with, say, 8 separate layouts rather than 1 big layout. So it's 8 separate layouts working together. So the process, again, what were we trying to achieve and what are the goals? Then we can talk about what hardware to drag in. Now, if you're adopting, say, what about established layouts that might want to adopt a layout control network? I stole these out of a operations primer. We're all pretty familiar with what control elements are needed to have, say, a prototype operating layout. You need locomotive control, some kind of car forwarding or car control. You need traffic or movement on main tracks type. For layout control, I modified the slide to show where I think that we need to emphasize the potential need for layout control. In this case, we know about DC, DCC, we've got battery control, rubber band, or hands. DC, one of the primary reasons Dr. Bruce Chubb developed CMRI was to provide DC automation of the power districts. As a train moved, it would automatically assign the next power district to that particular throttle. So this predates even DCC, and it wasn't all about signals. When you talk about car control and switch lists, there's perhaps a case could be made for a switch list on a layout control network if you're using something like RFID. In my case, I use NFC, which is near field communication. There's a tag on every piece of rolling stock, and as the train rolls over that reader, it can then send a message as to what that car is, what switch list it needs to go into, and where that car is to the dispatcher. So that's a case, but generally car control, freight forwarding, you don't need a layout control network unless you really want one. Traffic control is a little different. Now, these are all how railroads maintain authority to occupy or move on main tracks. It use track warrant control, direct traffic control, yard limits, timetable train order, and CTC. Layouts can use Mother May I. Even clubs will use Mother May I. We've highlighted TTTO and CTC. CTC, pretty much, if you want to adopt true CTC, you're talking about needing layout control network. While we're talking about signals, I took this out of a signals clinic very briefly. There is a difference between ABS, automatic block signal, and APB. They both do not have authority to convey movement over main tracks. They're both uncontrolled, but the difference is a matter of logic. With ABS, they're designed for double track primarily, but they are designed by the real railroads to maintain break distance between trains moving in the same direction. So they're fairly nearsighted. You could conceivably employ ABS signaling on your layout without a layout control network. Absolute permissive block, on the other hand, is designed to protect trains on opposing movements, primarily in single track territory. So there's logic involved in that. There's head block triggering and the need to tumble down signals in the opposing move direction to red so that two trains can't occupy single track at the same time if a dispatcher isn't paying attention. So there's logic involved. Now we're talking about a potential need for a network. Train order, timetable train order. If you're modeling more recent eras where train order signals were integrated in block signaling in order to give the crew warning that a stop was up ahead, they could give you an approach signal in the ABS signaling, for example. That was more of a modern feature. But the other thing is that if, when the railroad started to lay off towermen and station operators, they had to adopt a way to OS automatically before radio days. So you would get an OS bell or some kind of horn, perhaps in the dispatcher office. That would probably require some kind of layout control network to emulate that. Yard limits, I left that in here. what yard limits can do for you if we operate it properly, and that's a whole clinic in and of itself. We generally don't get this right, but you can really mess up your control points on a layout control bus network by planting your yard limit signs in the wrong place. That's another discussion. So what about speed versus route signaling? There is a difference. The aspects are different. They convey different rules. There are similarities, but generally, if you're a Western half of the continent modeler, you're probably looking at route signaling. If you're an Eastern half of the continent modeler, your prototype might be using speed signals. A layout control bus can handle that without changing hardware. That's a very important thing to note. So there's a case for layout control busing your signal system. What is CTC? Here's where we really need to be talking about a layout control bus. It's how you handle heavy traffic. They're dispatcher controlled. That means they're controlled type signals. Incidentally, in the fabrication or the layout building and the track laying, if you're using CTC, the gapping of the control points are extremely important. A single track turnout is in fact an interlocking in the CTC world, and the gapping and the position of the signal mass are critical. They indicate the gap boundaries. So we said dispatchers control track warrant control, DTC, yard limits, timetable train order. It is how they manage the movement on main tracks. They're all dispatcher managed. So with CTC, since CTC is the only kind of signaling that can grant authorities and they are controlled, then you need a layout control bus because you need a real-time, while operating human interface and a dispatcher sitting there integrated with the layout. We don't need to go into much detail other than it's hard to cheat with true CTC. CTC is very tailored to the specific track arrangement. So each layout has to consider how those control points are going to interact with trains and how the dispatcher is going to manage the traffic flow. And of course, they're very logic dependent. Centralized traffic control uses locking protocols. And so for every locking protocol, you have to have an unlocking protocol, meaning as the system locks, then it has to have a way to unlock. That's very logic intense. It's hard to cheat to actually emulate what the real railroads are doing. And again, the point is that a human can't manage that, even on a model railroad that has dense traffic, as well as a computer can do it. So there's a big case for a layout control network. With CTC, it's important to note dispatchers don't decide if a signal is cleared or a route can be changed. He can only request it. We can show examples of that, but we don't have time tonight for this particular segment. But again, how that works, the model railroader has to understand what he might do in the case where we have an encroachment on a circuit. David Barrow sitting here at his machine, there's nothing he can do about clearing that signal so this train moving eastbound, this A train, can get through. So there, it builds confusion if the logic isn't there to help the crews. All right. Let's look for briefly, and then we'll finish for tonight. Look briefly about what's involved in the input outputs of a generic. This is not my track plan per se, but let's look at a single track with two controlled sidings. You've got to have detection for the control points, which is the turnouts themselves with clearance space, and then turnout motors. Now, what about turnout feedback? Most will advise that that is totally unnecessary in a model railroad. You don't need point position feedback to have it work very reliably, especially with reliable motor systems like some of the better servo and controllers and tortoise switch machines. So we recommend you don't, plus it adds a ton of input demands on the nodes. So you've got head block detection, and I'm rolling fast, and I apologize for moving so fast. Then you've got your other single track detection. So at the end, your detection input devices were at 13 for 2 passing sidings and the intermediate single track. In the case of signaling, we got 20 searchlight devices for 40 output lines, plus 4 additional for the motors. So you can see how the planning is going to help you determine the distribution. Now let's take the modular layout real briefly. This is where our thinking caps really need to be turned on. If you're on a group talking about a modular club, looking into a layout control network, now we really need to start thinking about how we might do this. And I'm not going to offer solutions. I'm just going to offer some considerations. Let's take the single track siding here, single track in between, maybe a junction or a yard, followed by another section of single track. You've got your control point that have to be segregated and detected, and they're far-sighted, meaning this control point might have an impact on another control point down the line eastbound. So here's a prime case for a layout control network so that these control points and a dispatcher can interact with them. Perhaps you could gang these modules permanently where they're always together, then the nodes are near them. And then these intermediate sections are what you might change for every show or for every setup with another group or another layout club. And then figure out, well, do we use producer consumer type architecture or do we use master slave type architecture? How do we tell each node what the new events they're going to react to? All of these are questions that we want to dig into. And again, since there's so many variables, it's hard to offer that solution. The group has to sit down and think that through. But in my opinion, especially for a modular group that goes to shows, do whatever it takes to put a layout control network on that layout. Young people, the public, like the idea of interaction. Animation is one thing, like say the proverbial tornado, but where you have a dispatcher running trains, you could have an animation director sitting at a computer that can react to the crowd. A child comes, points out something. You could have something on the bus that reacts to that child, controlled either by a human or by some other kind of sensor. So what I'm recommending is do whatever it takes. Here we are, interactive animation, inhibit control. For example, your layout control bus with one flick of a switch could inhibit the public aisle side controls. And then when it's just the group operating, you could uninhibit and have aisle side controls, turnouts, and other devices. So in summary, we defined briefly a layout control network bus. We talked about 2 basic bus configurations. Some have advantages over others. And then we spent some time talking about why we might use layout control. Obviously, signaling is a big deal, but not necessarily the only reason. It could be you want remote access to all of the turnouts or some of the turnouts, or you may on a small layout just want one interlocking plant that's communicating all of the devices together. There's a lot of variables. The next segment, it's sometime in the future, we'll talk about how I applied. This is a CMRI node here. This is one of the staging yard control areas that has relay control. The computer does automatically for when a stage train is allowed to leave, it powers up that track so that the decoders aren't sitting there sounding off the whole time. And it also aligns the ladder, for example. We have some of my turnout control panels and the dispatcher panel. We'll go through how I did that, but it's not going to be a class on wiring for sure. Some thoughts to leave you with why we don't need LC. If you figured out, based on what I've talked about with signaling and various types of traffic control, if that's not what your layout needs, then great. You don't need a layout control system. And there's been some hype lately in LCC in the last, say, 10 years. But again, it's a niche subject. If you don't need it, you don't need it. And just because your buddy might have it doesn't mean you need it. Complex is okay for the builder and layout owner, but in the end, when you're finished, it's not okay if your operators are confused or it's complicated for them to use. That's a design failure, if you will. It doesn't take that much extra effort to get to the 90%. If you're planting signals, wiring them up, lighting them up, and you have turnout toggles and you have track detection, you're 80% towards, say, a CTC signaling system. Don't be put off by the software requirements because it's just not that much more effort with help to make it truly functional. Identify the requirements, then assess the solutions. In my opinion, it's better to want layout control network, but not really need it, than to need it and just be afraid to implement or not want it because it might take some effort. So with that, I went a little long, Jim, so we'll press on.
Chris, I can't thank you enough for doing it. It's the first time I think I understand the thought process that I would have to go through to decide whether I even want to have LCC or not. And I really do appreciate it. And I look forward to coming back and telling us what you did on your own particular layout. So thank you so very much for this.
You bet.
And if you have any questions for Chris, as soon as we get through with the show tonight, we'll come back and open it up and you can ask him any question that you want. But we are running a little long, so I'd like to continue right now with the featured modeler. And this is Mike Zucker, who owns Spring Creek Model Trains Hobby Shop. Mike, welcome tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Thanks for having us. I'm Mike. This is my brother, Jeff. So I guess we work at the store that our parents own. Dave and Deb Zucker own Spring Creek Model Trains. Both Jeff and I have come back here over the last, 6 years?
Yeah, 6 years.
And we now work here at Spring Creek Model Trains. So it's a family run affair here in Deshler, Nebraska. We both have come back from, back to our hometown from careers. Jeff was in IT running, about 4 different offices in a pediatrics firm. Myself, I was in civil engineering with the Union Pacific Railroad. So traveling across the country, building projects for the railroad. So I went from doing it 1-to-1 scale down here to either 87 or 160. So
yeah. Yep.
But anyway, Jim, that's kind of a quick overview. I guess we maybe get a little more into store history. The store's been in operations for 22 years now.
Yep.
They basically started the store out of the house that Jeff and I grew up in, doing train shows throughout the country. They would average what were we averaging before?
COVID?
Yeah.
About 42.
So we'd be at 42 train shows a year, sometimes on the same weekend. Right now, we're probably closer to probably 30 or 35 train shows right now, with them all still coming back. So we do that. We obviously got a storefront and then an online presence. So I can share here a couple of pictures of our store here. So let me get a couple pictures here going. This is the outside of our building. You can see that's our staff there. So there's 6 of us full-time. We got 2 part-time helpers. And as you go inside, that's kind of at the front door. This is kind of the overview of that area, primarily HO scale that you see here. N scales in the farther back underneath that Rock Island shield back there, or sign. Kind of another view of the front entrance. We have our detail parts kind of in electronics off to the left there. That's not really shown in the picture. Another shot down the side. This is one of our back walls that we have in the building, full of HO scale containers primarily. There's coal cars on the bottom shelf there that you can see. More of the details hung on the back walls of the aisles of the racks. Yeah.
Yep.
And then this is kind of a shot. It's hard to get a picture of the N scale, but all these bookshelves here back in this area with the lower ceiling are all N scale products. We got end caps there with containers and details and vehicles and whatnot. And then we have a whole separate room for track.
Scenery material.
Yeah, track and scenery materials
Yeah.
and everything. So anyway, that's kind of the store piece of it. We do, like I said, travel the train shows. So we kind of have a standard setup. We were out at, I guess right now we're on the road to San Antonio.
Yep.
Mom and Dad just left today for San Antonio. Earlier this year, we are out at the Amherst train show in Massachusetts. I got a couple of pictures there that I'll show off of here from that setup. But this is kind of our basic setup that you would see. We had a little more space at Amherst than we do at a lot of train shows, but you look for our sign, we kind of get that up in the air for people to see us at train shows. But you can see there, we carry all the HO, quite a bit of details. We're also a dealer for
Iowa Scaled Engineering's proto throttle.
Yep, and their grain bins lines. Here's just some of the interior shots. Just kind of the setup there. We had a nice tangent set up with locomotives there in the background. Shot of our locomotive area with the sign. And then this is kind of the N scale detail parts. A couple of our merchandise that we sell there with our company or hobby store name on it. So that was kind of the, I guess, overview there of the store and the booth. I don't know if we got any questions right now, Jim, if you want to go through any.
Let me ask you this. The model railroad hobby seems to me at least to be changing considerably from what it used to be. One of the areas that I see a major change in is people are interested in other hobbies now. They're interested in the skills that other hobbies bring to the table, not just model railroading. It used to be when I was younger, if you were a model railroader, that's all that's really what you cared about was model railroading. You didn't worry about the other hobbies. But now with the military modelers and the different kind of modeling skills that are being demonstrated on YouTube and elsewhere, model railroads are branching out. Are you all seeing that in your store? Is that how your modelers are acting?
I think we see that a little bit. They're really getting more into detail, in particular in the structures. We partnered with a company out of Salina, Kansas, called JP 3D, and he's 3D printing plane style concrete elevators that are a scale 160 feet tall. So it gives you a better feel of what the planes are versus the Wathers model, which is a much shorter elevator. And the guys really like that because they go, well, that saves me a ton. Now I can focus my attention to weathering and detailing it to look what I want it to look like versus having to, okay, how am I going to build this structure?
Right.
We see a lot more of that. We saw a lot of detail parts. We've
Lots
even
of
seen it
details.
come back in the undecorated products.
Yep.
Which really surprised us because we thought, well, pretty much everything's covered, but there's just lots of guys that have either started their own little fictitious railroad or want to do something for their railroad that there isn't made, and they just jump on that right now. And it's nice to see those things coming back. I kind of there for a while. The manufacturers just kind of did everything for you.
Yep. Yeah, almost every order sheet anymore, we're ordering undecorated models of whatever the manufacturer's putting out. So that's been a change here. Pretty recent change.
Yeah.
Probably
And
for us anyway. So
and the electronics has brought others into the hobby. They weren't necessarily into trains, but they really were intrigued by the electronics factor that has come about and to see what they can do. We have one guy who's running all of his stuff via computer. Even moving the trains is all run by computer, and he just gets a kick, just a thrill out of it. So that's what he likes to do. I mean, he goes, I got nothing but plywood, but he goes, my trains are moving. So
yeah, that's the best part about model trains. And I know probably everybody on this meeting tonight understands that, is all the different aspects that you can get into with model trains, right? I mean, you can be into the artwork, you can be into the detail of the models, right? You can be in the electronics of doing it, just the operations of it. I mean, it's just endless of what you can get into on your creative side, right? Or the interest of a hobby. So that's what we always encourage when we get new folks that come into the store or, come into our booth or call us, right? That's what we kind of talk through them with. So
one of the things that I hear from modelers an awful lot is there just seems to be a disconnect between the hobby shop owner and the modeler. There used to be, when I was younger, I used to spend an awful lot of time at the local hobby shop. I learned an awful lot just being there and talking to the other customers and talking to the owners and so forth. It was really a learning experience for me. And with the decline in the local hobby shop, that just seems to be a thing of the past now in many cases. And therefore that capability, what I call mentoring, is just not available anymore.
Well, we actually see quite a bit of it here, right? We spend a lot of time with our customers when they come into the store. I know Jeff and I do a lot of the back office work. But when we have a customer here, we spend a lot of time downstairs on the floor talking with them, seeing what their interests are, right? How we can help them.
Right.
Jeff and I and our dad, right, we're all model train enthusiasts, right? We all have our own collection. Jeff's getting ready. He's just finishing his area to start building his layout. So we've had experience building layouts, so we can pass on some of that. We've done a lot of the electronics. Jeff's involved in Fremo. So we try to pass that on, right? Because we see that as a resource, as a hobby store that we can provide, right, and help with. And by no means we know everything. I mean, we understand that, and we tell most of the customers that, but we say, hey, this is what we've tried in the past and it's worked, or here's what we've tried in the past and it didn't work. So learn from that mistake that we've done and try something else. So those are some of the things we like to focus on. So
yeah, there definitely has been that, but we try to be a store that has all that. We've had we do host a biennial train show here in our little community, and we get manufacturers to come, and we I guess it's a brag. We double the size of the town for that weekend.
Yeah.
And but along with that is we also bring clinics.
Yep.
So we have guys that are, for lack of a better term, an expert in their little bit of the niche of the field, sit and present information, and that's received very well. And we're hopeful to add on to our structure that we currently have to be able to include a meeting room to where we can do those a little more often. While we're out of the way, we know we couldn't do it like every week or something, but if we could do once a month, once every other month, it would get people down to be able to feel like they can ask a question, talk to people,
We do that.
just be around.
So we also host a Fremo event. We do
Right,
that every
right.
year. We host a Fremo event where we have an HO and N scale set up here in Deschler. And we do that too to get that community here, right, where people can share ideas and whatnot. And then we host that one as a free event. So we advertise it around the local area that wants to drive here and come check out trains, right, and talk to people that are willing to talk about it and try to get some interest level going, right? And
Yeah,
that's all
absolutely.
part of the same thing with the train show. Part of the train show too that we do is we try to bring in different layouts from all over the country that we don't get to see in the central part of the country at train shows. So, we've had layouts travel from the Gulf Coast, right? We've had them from out east have come, right? And out west have come. So it's just a way to inspire, right, the next person, or inspire that person that might be stuck on something to, hey, I can do this. So,
yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I hear modelers want is are the clinics. They like the hobby shops to be able to offer a space, and maybe have the local NMRA involved, or the local clubs involved, or something, that the community could feel that, this is where you go. You're interested in model railroading, this is where you go.
yeah.
And it sounds like that's the approach that you all are taking.
No, that's
Absolutely.
yeah. Yep.
Well, let me ask you this: where do you see the hobby shop business going? What do you see as your major challenges? I guess is how I'd put it right now.
I think one of our things, I didn't know if I mentioned it before, but we're in a 3,500 square foot space right now. We're busting at the seams too. So one of our big things and where we see, our hobby store going is the expansion of it, making it more of a destination for folks to come out here to rural Nebraska, right, to check us out. We are a destination, but it's just continuing to build on that. I think one of the things we really want to have is some layouts.
Be more interactive than we are.
Interactive layouts, right? Where you can put your hands on some throttles, right, and test some things
Right.
out, test out different turnout controls, different signals, those kind of things is what one of the grand plans or grand ideas that we have. And that's something that all four of us that, our parents and us too, that have talked about, that's kind of what we have the vision here in the next 5-10 years to be making happen here in Deschler and keep doing this kind of stuff. Obviously, we're going to have a presence on the internet. That's going to be important, just like your show here, how many people you reach. It's invaluable to be able to reach out there as a hobby store and be able to meet customers all across the country.
Yeah.
Train shows will be a part of Spring Creek Model Trains, I think, for as long as we're involved with it, which we hope is quite a few years yet. So, but yeah, that's what we see. We see a ton of opportunity in it. There's all kinds of different ways you can take your hobby store, just as you can with the hobby itself. So,
one of the things I wonder about is the ability to work with the small manufacturers. There's so many of them out there. They're making so many different products, and they're coming up with some detailed parts with the 3D printing and all the other technology that's out there now. What role do they play? How are they getting involved with a hobby shop?
Well, most of our contact with them so far has been through at a train show. We'll run into them in their local area. And my dad, just being a huge railroad enthusiast and a hobby enthusiast, will go over and start talking to him and say, hey, have you ever thought about, hooking up with a hobby store? And we'd love to carry your product. And sometimes they jump on that and they're like, yeah, this would be great. And sometimes I go, I have, but I'm so busy right now. And this is just a in the evening kind of job that I don't want to take that on. It's like, well, okay, we get that. But when you are, here's our card, give us a call. We're interested.
Yeah.
And
Our biggest success so far in the smaller manufacturer world has been Macrail.
Yep.
We've really jumped on board with them. We've sold a bunch of products and he is great to work with. So if you haven't, check his stuff out. Really good. Most of it's modern detail parts, but it's good stuff. And he treats everybody really well.
He'd be great for your show sometime, really, to get into some of that aspect. But it's just building that partnership with them, right? I mean, we have several different ones. I mean, Macrail, JP3, there's a couple to mention.
What was that? CGN scale.
CNG, right? N scale, right? Does details. We got a couple other 3D printing guys that we're talking to and working with. So it's definitely something we want to support them, because them creating that stuff helps us all out, right, in the hobby. So that's one thing that we want them to be successful, right? And if we can help them be successful, we want to be there.
And even if they don't want to say work with a hobby store, true, we do still. It's like if it's a product we think is outstanding, we'll direct people. Say, hey, have you looked at this? Check this guy's stuff out.
Yep.
Because you're gonna really like what you're seeing.
Yeah. But one of the things that I hear from small manufacturers is some of them just don't know, their pricing doesn't allow them to become involved with a hobby shop, because they can't give enough discount from what their prices are for the hobby shop to make any money by carrying their product. And so they just, it's either their pricing structure isn't there, or some reason they just don't get involved with the hobby shop, and therefore some of them decide it's a part-time business. They just don't want to grow any more than they are, and they're happy with what they're doing. They go to their occasional train show and that's it, which is fine.
Yeah, cool.
But the same as with any business, a lot of them are really not business people. They're hobbyists that went into manufacturing a product for the hobby. And therefore their business knowledge may not be as great as it needs to be in order to come up with pricing structure and work with hobby shops and so forth and increase their market.
Yep. Yeah, you hit it on the head on that. So I don't know much to add to it. But yeah, that's a challenge that we've run into on some of them, right? They just don't have the pricing structure, as you mentioned, right, for us to be able to work with them. So,
and the other thing that seems to me, at least what I hear from other modelers, they don't expect a hobby shop to have every single thing in the world available for them to walk in and buy, but they do expect the hobby shop to have the basics. They do expect the track. They do expect the controls. They do expect to be able to go in and get their basic needs met at a hobby shop. And then they need the hobby shop to be able to order for them or direct them where I can get this. Help me get what I really need for my modeling. That's what I hear the need from the modeler's standpoint is for a hobby shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. We definitely see that.
We see that all the time. A lot of our customers ask that. They ask us over the phone, right, through emails, coming into the brick and mortar here. But it's also something that we look at, when we start seeing a demand like on a detail part, that's something we're going to start stocking, right, and have it on hand here at the store. A lot of times we are like any other hobby store where we're ordering it from authors, right? The guy comes in and says, hey, I need this air horn. Well, we don't have it right now and we got to get it ordered in. So we do that a lot. But then, we have drawers of detail parts
we try to have
Details West, Detail Associates, right?
High-Line.
What's that? High Tech
Tech.
Details, the Sea Canyon Company. Sorry, I can't even remember them all. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we got drawers of them. We got so many of them. We're behind on keeping up with our inventory on them, but you know, guys will come in. We got them organized and everything. At least somebody can go in and, you know, search through them if that's what they're looking for that day. We totally agree on track. We try to keep, you know, track and turnouts. We got a
Yeah.
whole basement that we use as a warehouse. So we got, you know, track materials, turnouts down there. We
Turnout
struggled last year really on keeping up with turnouts.
Yeah. A lot of layout building happened during the pandemic.
That and then just trying to get them from the manufacturers. We had troubles like, you know, Pico had trouble getting it overseas here to the States. So we had trouble keeping up with them. You know, Micro Engineering's running through some challenges with their turnouts. But, you know, we do what we can to keep them here in stock. So we order large quantities when we put that in. So
Try to, yeah.
yeah, and then scenery. We try to do the same there, but it's that
That's a
cycle through a lot faster and order through our distributors quite a bit. So
Are you still having problem getting shipping, getting manufacturers to supply you, or is that getting straightened out now?
no, it's starting to smooth out. I mean, there's still some challenges out there, but you know, it's smoother than it was last year. And it never got horrible for model trains besides just some delays. So compared to, you know, other industries that we all hear about. So
yeah, electronics is probably the slowest thing.
yeah, but even that's really
We
picked
wait,
up.
it shows.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You still think a lot of the stuff is going to be made in China, or do you think that that's going to change?
It's hard to say there. I mean, that's really on the what happens, I guess, with the details and that everybody's asking for on the models, right? I mean, that dries up that amount of labor that's needed to build them. So we'll have to see. I know it changes all the time. They're always looking, but we know that much, but there's a talent base there in China that's building the hobby that we all like, right? So
right.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I do appreciate so much you being here tonight. I don't want to monopolize this. Does anybody else have any questions for Mike or Jeff?
Yeah, I apologize if I missed it earlier, but where did the name Spring Creek come from?
So our hometown here in Deschler, so we have Deschler was founded on the Rock Island. It was on a branch line of the Rock Island when the Rock Island built across the west. The branch line got pulled up in the early 70s.
It followed the Spring Creek.
Through here to make the branch line. So we have a Spring Creek on the south side of town. So then the Spring Creek model trains came from that, and then the R is from the Rock Island because our dad rail fanned that ever since he was old enough to walk. Tell the story about grandma.
Well, yeah,
where he was.
Dad always says, he goes, there's only one time or one way I was allowed to be late for supper, and that's if the train was in town, because she knew where I was.
So
Yeah.
and then our grandpa on our mom's side, he was a Rock Island Depot agent. So they lived all across northern Kansas, Colorado, up into Nebraska a little bit. So she had the connection to the Rock Island too. So that's kind of where the R in our name has come from. So, or the history of it.
And Dad really wanted to choose like he felt Spring Creek was generic enough it would transport anywhere. He didn't want it to be something that was locale specific in case he goes, well, if I ever decide to move, which he never will, but that's another.
We're not. Spring Creek has made its home here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our goal is to be that destination store. I mean, we have customers from all over the country. It amazes us every week,
every day,
on who shows up at our store. Just like at the end of this year, I think we had a guy from Florida, we had a guy from Washington, and I think a guy from California all show up in the same week, right? They fly out here or drive out here, or they're driving through, right? They take a couple hour detour to come to the store and hang out. I remember one couple from Pennsylvania who drove out here. They were rail fanning and whatnot, and they came to the store and they showed up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they completely changed all their plans. And
So they could come back the next day.
so they could come back the next day. They found a local hotel and turned around, came back, and spent the entire next day walking around. And
Yep.
he was on the phone with his friends back in Pennsylvania and says, "Hey, they still got this or that, or you need this." So
Yeah, it's amazing how small the world is.
yeah,
really.
it's pretty fun. So
What about your mail order business? Is that going well for you? Is that increasing or?
so it
It's
picked,
very
yeah.
much increasing. We knock on wood, the pandemic was fortunate for us. We actually launched our interactive website at the right time and had the right amount of right products out there, that it just has been growing and growing and growing. And Mike's efforts to get us involved with shows like yours, and we've been on a couple others, has really helped pay off, just getting our name out there.
yeah, letting people know who we are, right, and that we do have stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's helped a lot. It's kind of side by side work there, and the work with the train shows too. People know us out there. So yeah, if you haven't checked out our website, I mean, I can show it if you don't mind, Jim, but
No, not at all.
a little screen share here of the website. Well, this is our homepage, so it's just www.springcreekmodeltrains.com. So this is our, like I said, our homepage. We do a lot of exclusive products. That's one thing that we really like to do. We've started with coal trains with LBF, and
Yeah.
I think we're on number
22
exclusive run. We keep those right here in this section. You can see a coal car there, an Omax coal car that we're doing with Rapido, plus one of the plastic hoppers, a Procore. It was an experimental paint scheme that Procore did, that there's at least evidence of one car painted in that blue. And that's a Boeing car. Just some of the other featured products that we got. We did this, some custom numbers there with Bowser on their ballast car. But going back to the top, Jeff's made a really good, easy in shopping, by scale. So just going into HO scale, just see all the different brands. So whatever you're looking for. I think
and it's still very much a work in progress. We only have about a quarter of our inventory listed.
Yep. So we break it down by the product line, and then you can just get in there and start searching whatever locomotive or freight car that you might be looking for. So this is the way it is. Our shipping, we got 2 gals that kind of handle that every day for us, and we help out as needed with them, but we take care of that. Customers call, we do a pre-order. We got a manual pre-order system, so we're really learning more about the demand of the hobby through the internet. So our ordering has changed quite a bit to where we try to get, because we always want to be
still learning.
We always want to be a store that has the product, that not has the product, but to where you can come in and put your hands on it. So
yeah, we don't want to just order it, be sold out all the time.
So that's something we always shoot for.
Well, it sounds like exactly what modelers are looking for in a hobby shop. It sounds like that you all are doing exactly what I hear modelers say that they want from their hobby shop. So I wish you the best of luck.
Appreciate it.
Can't thank you enough for being here tonight. And if you'd like to come back in the future, please just let me know. Love to have you back.
Yeah,
great.
We'd love to come back, Jim. We appreciate the time and what you do here for the hobby. So this is pretty awesome. It's been fun listening in today. So
wow, I learned stuff. So
great. For sure.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yep.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for coming again, and I really do appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's it for this evening. I hope everybody enjoyed it. most importantly, I hope everybody learned something. That's what the shows are all about. So I'd like to turn it over now to Clark Kooning, MMR, for the after show. Clark, welcome, sir.
Just meant 1 minute, Jim. I got a little issue going on at home. Hold on.
Oh, all right. Well, Mr. Kooning will be with us shortly, he said. So that while we're waiting for him to join us, I would like to remind everybody, if you haven't, please go to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe. Make sure you send in the confirmation email that you'll get from the website. And that makes sure that you'll get all of the future emails about future shows and what the login links are and so forth. If you'd rather watch us on YouTube, that's fine. We hope that you'll subscribe to our new YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, so that you'll get all the notices of the shows that way. Again, thanks so much for being here tonight. And it looks like Mr. Kooning has joined us. Clark?
I am. I'm ready to go. There was just a sort of phone call for me that I had to answer. So, hey, how is everybody? Woohoo! I'm just tired. We've had like 2 days of snow. We've had about, 20 inches of snow. So if any of you would, miss that, like Jim, if you want to come up and shovel, you'd be welcome.
It was only 80 degrees here today.
Yeah, thanks. With the wind chill was down to 78. Yeah, I heard you. Everybody's
Clark, this is Phil. Real quick, Mike, are you still there? I wanted to open a question. Mike from Spring Creek, are you? Hey, so this was a thought process. You guys were talking about having new space and more space. And, kind of thinking about how do you begin to create more connection in the hobby shop and in the hobby. If we look at some of the things that have been done of the build-alongs on the show, is there a way, or maybe some of the things that have been done like on the Saturday morning on the skills thing, is there a way of basically central, because the challenge for you guys is how do you get people to come in and do that stuff in your facility? And it's hard, but if we get somebody centrally like Chris who does something on Saturday, or a build along where it's a specific kit where folks could come, on a Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and there would be like build along over a series of weeks. And kind of you would be the place that had some of the things to get them started with, and they'd understand, well, you got to buy some certain tools for this and that. But, it might be an interesting thought process of, how do you make things accessible at, at a store level with those kind of processes? Because, it's kind of interesting as you can kind of see stuff on the internet, but it's different if you're in kind of a physical location and you have access to the, tools and stuff. I think it might be interesting to think about and have a conversation about, Jim. The idea of how do you take kind of some of the things that are done on the show and make them so they could be integrated into a physical space for some folks in a physical space to actually be able to see it and be more integrated, more involved in the process.
Yeah, no, that's a cool idea.
And if I may, this is Chris. I do the Saturday scratch building show. Some of the things that I'm kind of planning out for in the future, I'm trying to figure out a way that it would be real convenient for people to just go to one or two different vendors per se to obtain kind of like packs of things. Because I know some of the things I'm going to be getting into is not commonly stocked by you guys. I doubt that you have, say, urethane carving foam or balsa foam in the store. Maybe you guys do, I don't know, but I'm gonna, I can carve a stone or a brick wall in probably half the time that I could carve it in plaster, as an example, and I can texture it and make it come out better than a plaster in that amount of time. So I'm going to be showing those type of techniques, but I, as a presenter, can't really tell everybody where to go to get that stuff. And so I'm looking for a way to come up with a couple of different vendors who I could kind of funnel my people to, who could get stuff, but it would have to be really, really cheap because of the shipping and everything else, type of thing. And so anyway, just to give you a bit of feedback on where Phil's coming from. Phil and I haven't even talked about this, but he's definitely on the same page that I'm going.
No, it definitely makes sense. I mean, it's something we'd definitely be interested to talk about, right? We've done a little bit of this kind of stuff, but nothing to the magnitude you guys are talking about. So I know we've done some of that stuff with helping people out with like the Wathers build offs, they've done the last couple of years. So that's kind of where my mind was going as you were talking about it. It's something, a different scale of that, I guess. So
Yeah, even thinking about, taking a kit that people would be interested in and building it, something that, would have kind of more universal appeal, or
yeah,
something, or like weathering techniques for cars, or it's, but the interesting thought process is, if whoever's doing the clinic knows ahead of time kind of what's required, they can kind of have that set out where you can say, well, some of that we already have, some of it, we're going to have a deal where there's a little package or something.
right.
I don't know what the right thing is, but it's just, one of the things is, how do you make skills approachable?
Yep.
And, building in a build along is really all about approachable skills to me. I mean,
Yep.
it's I was saying, how did I do this cool thing? And so, and maybe doing the physical might be an interesting thought process of how to make hobby shops more kind of a center of interest from a hobby perspective, because
Sure.
it's not just your folks that are local. It's, anyway, interesting thought. So probably worth thinking
I like,
about.
no, I like that idea. I can see a lot of different avenues you could go with that. So might be something we really think about maybe for one of our next train shows and give it a shot. So
Some of you guys know Al Booz, who's part of the San Antonio Model Railroad Association. Mike, where you're going
yep.
This coming weekend. Al did a couple of years ago. He sold to us in the club $1 or $2 package of material, and the club actually spent a couple of nights in the course of a week, course of a month, scratch building a small station. What do you want to, house or whatever. It didn't cost a lot of money. Of course, I had these skills for a long time, but it was fun. It was something that brought the club together. And I was kind of hoping eventually, Chris, that we would kind of do the same kind of thing, instead of showing what we did last week, actually sitting in front of a camera and building something and watching the actual build go on.
You've kind of missed that, Ron. I'm sorry, but we've been doing that on many of these occasions, and I've done 3 kits myself on here.
I was trying to go along with the suggestion of having a quick kit put together of scratch built materials.
Yeah, you're right there, Father Ron, and that is part of where I'm headed with the current build on the scratch build. I've just been trying to deliver a whole lot of generalized modeling information to the beginning modeler before we get into the actual construction. And we're now finally getting into the more construction phase. That's why I had noted that I, quite frankly, am behind a lot of you guys out there in the construction phase.
If there's I could splurge for a moment here, going back to the discussions of controllers. I don't know if the fellow's still on with this, or maybe somebody else could help me with this. I have yet to embark on a layout control system. I'm just bugging. I've had the layout for pieces of it for 50 years. So I've got all kinds of hardware. But my question is, at what point does the hardware, like turnouts, be they dual coil switch machines, tortoises, or servos, or signals, are they bicolor, tricolor? When do you make the decision on hardware for the two, what sound like principal systems, this master slave system versus the producer consumer? Do you have to make hardware decisions before you decide on master slave versus producer consumer?
Jim, I wouldn't focus on the hardware until you identify what you wanted to do. Say you want all mainline turnouts have a switch motor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to figure out what switch motors you plan to use, and then how they are best wired.
Well, the problem is I'm probably 80% on turnout control. 20%
already on your layout?
Yeah, all right. 20% is up top with old caboose throws that need to be automated. But I've got, probably 40% maybe tortoises, and 20% ancient twin coils, or the newer railcraft, which are essentially twin coils, and a few servos, the old SG 90s that are controlled off an Arduino. So I have this hodgepodge. Is there any reasonable way to control all of the different types, or is it too late?
I wouldn't say it's too late. There could be some of those components that should be replaced for your own peace of mind and standardization. But what's going to be critical is good documentation by whatever layout control system you adopt. For example, CMRI. Dr. Chubb is probably one of the most prolific model railroad authors, and his documentation is superb. Every single one of those turnout type controllers you mentioned, motors, whatever, he documents with line drawings of how to hook them up to the CMRI. Now, if LCC manufacturer like RC Circuits or MQ Trains, which is not LCC, but if Speed has good documentation on how to hook those various devices, it isn't so much that you have different kind of devices. You just need to know how to hook them up to the bus through what piece of hardware, whether it be an Arduino or some other RC Circuits particular box, a small node, a large node, whatever. So
I mean, I think the big discussion you have to have is how you're going to do control and what you're controlling, right? So, you know, if you're implementing a centralized control schema like a dispatch control panel, then you have to have centralized control. And if you're doing centralized control, then a system that implements essentially what are called stateless endpoints, where the endpoints don't have state, they don't maintain their own state, they basically follow a state they're told, is a much easier implementation. In fact, that's the way the railroads implement their systems. The thing about LCC, what LCC does, and this is one of those, there's a great reason to do this, but you've got to understand what the reason is and whether you're actually doing it. Is LCC, that thing that's built into it that everybody talks about, they don't really talk about what that means. And so it's this concept of a consumer, and that in the computer industry, It's a thing called publish and subscribe. So the idea of publish and subscribe is really simple. If you and I want to do two things, okay, and let's say I am a detector at a stoplight, and I can detect that someone's at the stoplight, and you are the stoplight that turns on and off. The way publish and subscribe works is, as the detector, I'm able to publish that someone is at the stoplight. You can then subscribe to me and say, Phil, let me know when someone's in the detector at the crosswalk when the car's there. What happens then, once that relationship is set up, then what you do with that is your decision. What I know as an endpoint is someone subscribed to a change in my state, and I provide that to them, and then they can do something with it.
Sort of makes sense.
That's kind of the way this works. So then the idea is the stoplight would change. Now, that's a way of doing distributed intelligence. So now you have to write the intelligence. There's another way of doing this, which is you have something in the center, and what happens is, when the detector gets detected that there's someone in the sitting at the stoplight, that gets signaled up here on one signal. And the thing in the center looks at it and says, oh, now it's time to turn the light on green. But it's a centralized control versus this concept that you have distributed decision-making. So publish and subscribe is used in systems where you need distributed decision-making. And so a good example of that is in industrial automation, right? Because if I've got two robots and those two robots can occupy—
That's the only thing I'm familiar with. I used to do industrial automation, and then programmable logic controllers are about all that makes sense to me.
Right. So if you think about it, if I've got two robots and those two robots can occupy the same physical space,
yeah,
I can't have a single program controlling both robots. The robots have to have their own programs. What I have to have a way of signaling between them where they are in space. So for example, if this robot says, I'm going to move into the shared space, it publishes saying I'm in the shared space. And then this one can say, oh, I can't go in there till you leave the shared space.
Yeah, until they get a permissive to do something else.
But it's the idea, that's what publish and subscribe is great for distributed intelligence. This is where it becomes really challenging from a model railroad perspective.
All right.
If you're building a really simple control system, right, and you've got just a simple like shelf layout, LCC could be very interesting because you don't need a computer to run anything. You can write little programs, but you have to write little programs with LCC, or you have to grab little sketches to tell the LCC what to do. Because when you get that subscription, you have to figure out what to do. Oh, I need to turn this light on. So you have to have a little thing that basically says it can follow some commands. It's great for that. The minute you get up to where you want to start really emulating a railroad, if you look in JRMRI, there's this whole block of stuff in JRMRI around emulating the railroad at a logical level, right?
Goodness.
So it emulates the idea of how do those permissive signals work? How does block control work? And there are schemas that have been written on top of that that emulate specific points in time.
Well, and the NMRA acknowledges that. As a matter of fact, in their LCC documentation, they specifically state.
But Chris, I'm coming back to this. I want to come back to the point here.
Okay.
If all the control is in the center, there's no reason to have the nodes talk to each other. It's just, if something changes out here, JRMRI needs to know. Now, here's the problem with publish and subscribe in a centralized system. And by the way, I'll tell you, I know this because I was one of the guys that did this. Back in the days when we started VoIP, what you were all doing right now, the telephone system is a very dumb endpoint system, the original phone system, right? That phone that was in your house, do you know what kind of computer was inside that phone? back in 1960 that was in your house that you used to pick up and talk to people? What kind of computer was in that phone?
What, the dial?
Yeah. What kind of computer? How did that? There was a phone in your house in 1960. You could pick up and dial a phone number. What kind of computer ran that phone? What was in that phone? The intelligence in that phone?
It used relay logic. Not
There was no intelligence in the phone. When you dialed, it made a counter, which moved a relay, which made your phone call work. The point is, the endpoint was stateless. It didn't know what its state was. When you push a button, it says, user pushed button 1. It has no idea what button 1 means. By the way, when you went to the digital phone with the push buttons, it was exactly the same thing. It was sending a tone. It had no idea what that tone meant. The connection, all the intelligence was up in the core. When we went to do voice over IP, the first implementations of voice over IP were done using a technology called 323, which became a technology called SIP. And the difference is that the endpoints could talk to each other. I could actually tell my endpoint, call Bob's endpoint. The problem was when you took that technology and you put it into these systems with centralized control, you now have a huge issue, which is you have to, in some way, manage distributed state change to the core. So in other words, think about it. You can change the state out here, but the center doesn't know. Because unless you signal to it in some way to tell it you change state, it has to try to connect with you and figure out how to change state. So it turns out when you've got these centralized control systems, having distributed state is a huge issue. And in fact, if you look at the system we're on right now, there's very little distributed state in this system. Your node, the software that's running inside of your computer, can do very little on its own. It's almost all signaled through the Zoom control software that runs somewhere on the internet, because that's a much easier way to build and control large systems. So if you're going to run that centralized system there, like a JRMI and a Panel Pro, there's virtually no reason to have this concept that LCC has. That was what makes it really complex, which is the idea that the nodes can talk to each other. If a presence on a node over here coming on requires a signal to be turned on a node over here, that decision is going to be made and driven up at the core. These two things don't need to ever talk to each other. And it's just, by the way, I'm a computer scientist guy. So from a pure implementation perspective, by the way, the modular that Chris showed is a great example of where LCC would be brilliant. I think taking LCC and figuring out a way to standardize the API between modules in a modular layout with signaling with LCC would be brilliant, because you could now have an automated way to have a self-discovery where you could plug things together and my module would detect that your module was there, and we could signal each other and determine exactly how we manage our signaling. And that could actually be written as a really cool open source overlay to LCC, because it takes advantage of publish and subscribe. It's very hard to build that standardized architecture for a modular layout. There's things change.
But the problem, if the configuration of that modular layout changes, that LCC closed loop, if you will, with no host controller or no master, could be hard to deal with, because you've got to change all those nodes and what events they're supposed to respond to, right?
Self-driving cars.
Yeah.
If that were true, they wouldn't work. It's going to work.
To get it back to
anyway, I'm sorry, but
slightly, if I can get a slightly simpler question, which system, master slave versus producer consumer, LCC versus a more centralized, which involves less programming for us non-programming types versus mechanical process logic controllers from the 70s, where we just controlled all our machinery with just simple straight line programming, which we called programming, is really ladder logic.
Well,
Well,
with Panel Pro, you've got to go in and write the definitions. And if you want to call that programming, you've got to go in and write what your layout looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gets used by the signaling systems to control things that you've defined. So you define basically elements in that. You have to go through and do that process with kind of whatever you use, right?
JMRI is probably the faster solution or least amount, but that doesn't mean it isn't somewhat involved.
Uh-huh.
I went the full programming because I wanted the versatility. So I used Visual Basic and coded it. But
Huh.
JMRI could probably do that, Jim. Now, if the manufacturers, if they ever adopt and start producing LCC components, let's say for LCC CAN bus communication, maybe they'll claim there's a plug and play capability where you buy a module that handles one control point. Maybe. I don't know. It's too early to tell, even though it's been decades in the making. There's going to be some effort and probably at least a graphic user interface like JMRI required to set something up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much. That gives me some insight then. I have started fooling with JMRI, trying to, climb up that slippery learning curve. But I did the same thing years ago, and now I'm trying to teach myself C++ so I can program my Arduinos. That's been a learning curve. But I can still scratch build with basswood. So, some of your skills you just sort of build on.
Your Arduinos may be the interface hardware you need to that switch motor. Then it'll be a question of what do you put in the Arduino to react to, say, something like JMRI. It's not an easy solution, but it is something that you could dig into. Like I said in the presentation, the Arduinos have CAN bus shields, there's Wi-Fi shields, there's Ethernet shields. So pretty much you're going to have to look around, see what's available. Maybe MQ trains is the way to go.
But start at the top with what is the control schema software you're going to use.
Yeah, do you need real-time interfacing?
But just there's a few choices there, right? There's that German system that somebody came in and talked about a little while ago. There's using JMRI and Panel Pro and that. I mean, those are kind of your choices. So once you choose one of those, then the next choice below that is, what's the right hardware to use? And quite frankly, if you choose JMRI and Panel Pro, there are two paths. You can use LCC, or you can use a CMRI based product, or a third path is you can develop it yourself.
Oh,
Right?
there's guys using LocoNet as well, Digitrax LocoNet.
Or Digitrax LocoNet. That's another option. Yeah, there's Digitrax LocoNet. So you choose one of those options. The CMRI, there's either the Chubb stuff, which you basically buy and solder yourself, or there's some stuff from a guy who does it with Arduinos. And by the way, once you get to that point, it's really cost per port. Is really what's important. Here's the deal is, it comes back to what Chris said. So we're doing an O-scale layout and doing it. We're using CMRI, and we actually bought a bunch of equipment from a guy who was basically was moving out of his house and took his layout out. So we got a reasonable deal on that. But basically, you're right. When you look at the signals, we've got 80 signals that are going to be average. It's average 2.2, I think, heads, 2.2 signals per mass. So you kind of go through the numbers there, and and we did the 3-color because when you're on a large layout, the yellow that you get out of the green red is hard to see at distance. And plus we ended up getting some signals that have 3. So you go through the math, it ends up being, an awful lot of IO points. And so the cost per IO point, and I think Chubb gets down pretty inexpensive. I think LCC, because again, you're paying for that distributed intelligence. There's a cost of that in the end.
Okay.
It's the reason simple endpoints kind of win. There's actually you ever want, I'll walk you through a pretty good logic of why, intelligence ends up basically kind of in the middle, and you have simple endpoints, very fast core, and some intelligence in the middle. And it just turns out that there's not a lot of value in LCC once you've decided on that's one of those centralized cores, because the centralized core has to control everything, because otherwise you have a switch moving out at the edge without the core knowing. And if you have a dispatcher, if you're running CTC with a dispatcher, the dispatcher that can't see at the central control panel. Now, what you have is, if you look in GRMRI and Panel Pro, you can implement local control. So you have a switch locally where you switch on and say, I want control. And then the dispatcher can grant control, but then it shows on the dispatch panel that control has been granted, but it's all being done from the core. And I think that's the big
that
thing.
sort of makes sense then.
By core, Phil, you're meaning in it master, right?
The master, right, at the core, that core software. So there's the master slave kind of thing is kind of, yes, you have to look at it from two sides, the network side and the compute intelligence side. And they're two different things. And the network's how things move around. The compute intelligence is where decisions are made. And the real question is, are decisions made in a central singular location, or can decisions that change state, right? Am I on or off? Can those be made remotely? And if they're made remotely, then how are they done? And if they're made remotely, how is that signaled back to the core that needs to understand the state of the edge? And it's a very complex kind of computer science question about how you distribute intelligence, right? It's kind of the interesting question about, when you talk to your phone, does it stay in your phone or does it go somewhere else? When you talk to Alexa, is that intelligence that's analyzing what you say happening in Alexa over in your living room, or is it happening on a server in Seattle? And that's kind of that's where you do different functions in these kind of models. That's always interesting.
Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate you kind of giving me some insight in there, and I can sort of figure out which direction I ought to be going. I'm still crawling up the learning curve, but it's and I put a little sand. I got the sanders on now, so I'm going up a little bit faster. Thank you.
Yeah. But I think the cool thing is that if you want to model for operations, a more modern time frame, as Chris said, with this technology, there's no reason not to do it. I mean, you can have signaling that makes it very realistic to operate your layout.
Yeah, well, I mean, the lion's share of the work I've put in for 80 signal masts with dual heads and whatever has been constructing the signals, wiring them in, planting them on the layout. The software ended up being the smaller part of the effort. And yet it's the software that drives the logic that makes it truly realistic. So now that we've killed Clark's after show.
I'm sorry, Clark, we'll throw it back to you. And I actually have to, my wife is driving to LA, so I have to take care of dogs.